The metal detector screamed beneath the quiet backyard. She thought it was junk, maybe an old pipe, but the signal was too strong, too deep. After hours of digging, metal appeared. Not scrap, not trash, a car roof, buried beneath her yard. When she forced the trunk open, her breath stopped cold. Some secrets are buried for a reason. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from, so we can bring more stories like these. Rachel Morgan liked the quiet. That was the first thing that settled into her bones when she bought the old house at the edge of town. The silence wasn't empty. It was patient. The kind that sat with you instead of pressing against your ears. The house itself leaned slightly to the left, like it had gotten tired of standing straight decades ago. Weathered white siding. A porch that creaked even when nobody stepped on it. Windows that reflected the sky a little too dark, as if they were holding on to memories they didn't want to share. Most people would have passed it by. Rachel didn't. She was 38, calm in the way people get after life has already tested them enough times to knock the urgency out of their steps. No flashy clothes, no loud opinions, just observant eyes and a curiosity that never really turned off. The realtor had warned her, almost apologetically. House has been sitting a long time. Folks say the land's strange. Rachel smiled then, the same way she always did when someone used that tone. Strange how? The realtor shrugged. Just history. History was exactly why she bought it. That morning, the sun rose pale and gentle, spreading gold across the uneven backyard, like it was blessing something unfinished. Rachel stepped out onto the grass with a mug of coffee in one hand and her metal detector resting over her shoulder, like a trusted companion. The backyard was big, bigger than it needed to be. The ground dipped and rose in odd places, like the earth had been disturbed and never fully settled back into itself. Grass grew thick in some patches and thin in others. Near the fence line, the soil looked darker, heavier, almost compressed. Rachel noticed everything. She always had. Metal detecting wasn't about money for her. That's what people never understood. She wasn't chasing gold or hoping to strike it rich. She was chasing stories. Objects left behind when people thought no one would ever look again. Coins that passed through 100 hands. Old buttons from coats nobody remembered. Bent nails. Rusted keys. Little pieces of lives that slipped through cracks. She slipped on her headphones, flicked the detector on, and let the familiar hum settle into her ears. Slow steps. Controlled sweeps. The machine passed over the ground like a question being asked again and again. Nothing. Nothing. A faint blip, probably junk. She marked it mentally and moved on. From the neighboring yard, laughter carried over the fence. Mr. Thomas Reed stood there with his arms crossed, coffee in hand, watching her the way he always did. Half amused, half uneasy. "Mornin', Rachel," he called out. "Mornin'," she replied, lifting a hand without stopping her sweep. "You finding pirates yet?" he joked. She smiled. "Not yet, but I'm patient." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You and that thing," he said, nodding at the detector. "Always looking for something." Rachel stopped for a moment and looked up at him. "Aren't we all?" That seemed to shut him up. He nodded once and went back inside. Rachel returned her attention to the ground. She followed the perimeter first, mapping the space in her head. Near the old oak tree, the detector buzzed faintly. Probably nails from a long-gone fence. Near the porch, nothing but silence. Then, near the far end of the yard, close to where the grass thinned unnaturally. The detector chirped. Sharp. Clear. Rachel stopped. She adjusted her stance. Swept again. The sound repeated. Her eyebrows lifted. Not excitement, not fear. Just interest. All right, she murmured. Hello to you too. She knelt and pressed her palm into the dirt. It felt firmer here, packed tight, like it had been compressed intentionally. Not the loose, forgiving soil she'd found everywhere else. She stood back up and flagged the spot with a small orange marker. Later, she whispered, like she was promising the ground something. She moved on, but the detector kept pulling her back. Every pass near that area sang louder, clearer, like the earth was insisting. Rachel ignored it for now. She wasn't in a rush. By late morning, a couple of neighbors had wandered past, pretending to check their mail while sneaking looks at her yard. That thing actually work? One woman asked. Sometimes, Rachel answered honestly. Hope you don't dig up nothing cursed, another joked. Rachel laughed softly. If it's cursed, it'll have to wait its turn. They walked off, shaking their heads. Treasure hunter. That's what they called her. They didn't understand that history doesn't stay buried because it wants to. It stays buried because people decide not to look. By afternoon, clouds rolled in, thin and gray, stretching shadows across the yard. Rachel wiped sweat from her brow and took another sip of water, eyes drifting back to the flagged spot. Something about it tugged at her. Not fear, recognition. She returned to it slowly, almost respectfully. The detector screamed this time. Not a blip, not a chirp, a scream. Rachel's breath caught. She lifted the detector, reset it, and passed again. The sound was unmistakable, large metal. Deep, her heartbeat quickened, but she forced herself to stay steady. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She pushed the shovel into the dirt. The soil resisted. She leaned into it, muscles tightening, breaking through layers that felt wrong. Too compact, too deliberate. She stopped, pulled the shovel out, and suddenly felt watched. Rachel straightened, scanning the yard. Nothing. The fence line stood empty. The house loomed behind her, quiet as ever. Still, a chill slid down her spine. She shook it off. Get a grip. She packed up for the day as the sky darkened, leaving the orange marker in place. The ground beneath it felt like a held breath. That night, Rachel lay in bed, listening to the house settle around her. Creaks, pops, old wood remembering weight. Then, a sound. A car door. She sat up instantly. The sound was clear, metallic, close. Rachel grabbed her robe and stepped to the window, peering out into the darkness. The driveway was empty. The street was still. No headlights, no engine, no movement. Her backyard lay swallowed by shadow. She stood there for a long moment, heart tapping slowly, evenly. Just the house, she murmured. But the feeling didn't leave. The next morning, she returned to the yard before breakfast. The detector screamed the moment she turned it on, right where she'd marked it. Rachel stared at the ground. Her quiet hobby, her curiosity, her love for forgotten things, they weren't leading her to coins. They were leading her to something the town had buried on purpose, and whatever it was ready to be found. Rachel didn't sleep much after that. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the kind of restlessness that settles in when your instincts keep tapping you on the shoulder, whispering that something important is nearby. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that patch of dirt, felt the resistance of the soil, heard the detector scream in her ears. By the time dawn broke, she was already dressed. Gray hoodie, old jeans, work boots still dusted with yesterday's dirt. She stood at the edge of the backyard, coffee untouched on the porch railing, eyes locked on the orange marker, like it might move if she looked away too long. The grass around it looked wrong. Not dead, not alive either. Just uneven, patchy in places, too thick in others, like it had grown back in a hurry once and never quite caught up to the rest of the yard. Rachel stepped closer. The ground dipped slightly under her boot. She frowned. "All right," she murmured. "Let's talk." The metal detector hummed to life, steady and low. She swept once. Silence. She swept again. A sharp tone cut through the air. She adjusted the sensitivity, narrowed the range, and passed over the spot again. The signal hit hard, clean, unmistakable, large object, deep. Rachel crouched and pressed her hand into the soil again. It was colder than the rest of the yard, packed tight like it had been stomped down and sealed decades ago. She drove the shovel in. The blade barely sank. She leaned harder, gritting her teeth, breaking through inch by inch until the soil finally gave with a dull crack that echoed deeper than it should have. She froze. That sound wasn't earth. It was something hollow. Rachel pulled the shovel free and stared into the shallow hole. Rust-colored flakes clung to the metal blade, brittle and dry. Rust. Her pulse picked up. She scraped away dirt carefully with her gloved hands now, slower, more deliberate. The soil came up in chunks instead of crumbles, like it had been layered back into place instead of naturally settling. A few feet away, the fence creaked. Rachel glanced up. Mr. Thomas Reed stood there again, only this time he wasn't joking. He leaned heavily on the fence post, eyes fixed on the hole, jaw tight like he'd bitten down on something sharp. "Morning," Rachel called, trying to sound casual. He didn't smile. "You really gonna dig there?" he asked. She wiped dirt from her gloves. "Looks like something's under here." He swallowed. "That yard's been dug before," he said carefully. Rachel tilted her head. "When?" He hesitated. "Long time ago." "How long?" she pressed. Mr. Reed exhaled through his nose, the sound shaky. "Before you moved in. Before me, even." Rachel straightened. "Then why's it still packed like concrete?" He didn't answer. Instead, he shook his head slowly. "Some things are better left buried." The words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Rachel studied his face, the sweat at his temple despite the cool morning, the way his fingers gripped the fence like he needed it to keep standing. "Buried things don't usually stay quiet," she said. He met her eyes then, and for a second, she saw fear there. Not concern, not superstition, fear. "I'm just saying," he muttered, backing away. "You don't know what kind of trouble lives under old dirt." He turned and went back inside without another word. Rachel stood there, heart pounding, the quiet suddenly louder than it had ever been. She looked back down at the hole. Rust flakes, packed soil, hollow sound. Her detector screamed again when she passed it over the spot, louder than before, like it was losing patience. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I hear you." She dug. Hour after hour, the hole grew wider and deeper. Sweat soaked through her hoodie. Her arms ached. Dirt piled up around her boots. The deeper she went, the stranger things became. The soil layers didn't match natural patterns. There were signs of compression, tire marks, faint but unmistakable, pressed into dirt that should have erased them decades ago. She brushed dirt away from a flat surface. Metal. Not scrap. Not debris. Smooth. Painted. Her breath caught. She scraped more carefully now, clearing away dirt with her hands until a curve emerged. A curve that shouldn't have been there. Rachel sat back on her heels, staring. "No," she whispered. She grabbed the detector and passed it again. The machine shrieked. She dug faster, heart racing, until more of the shape revealed itself. A roof. Car roof. Her stomach dropped. By mid-afternoon, neighbors had gathered again. This time, without jokes. Phones were out. Whispers carried across the yard. "Is that what I think it is? Didn't someone disappear around here?" Rachel stood in the hole, hands shaking, staring at the metal surface beneath her. A sedan, buried, on her property. She climbed out and wiped her hands on her jeans, mind racing. Police. She needed to call the police. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Her eyes were drawn back to the shape, to the way the dirt clung to it like it didn't want to let go. Curiosity clawed at her chest. She climbed back down, carefully. She brushed away more dirt near the back of the car, heart thudding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The rear windshield was shattered inward. Time had done its work. She moved to the trunk area. Her breath came shallow. The latch was visible now, rusted, sealed, untouched for decades. "Rachel," someone called from above. "You should wait for the cops." She nodded without looking up. "I know," she said. But her hands didn't stop moving. She wrapped her fingers around the latch. Dot. It crumbled slightly under her grip, flakes of rust breaking away like dead skin. Her hands trembled. She pulled. The latch resisted, then gave. The trunk opened with a long, aching groan. Rachel froze. The smell hit her first. Old, stale, wrong. Inside lay a rotted suitcase, fabric disintegrating, its contents barely recognizable beneath layers of decay. Clothes, a shoe, a wallet. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered. Someone screamed from the yard. Rachel scrambled out of the hole, breath coming in sharp gasps, heart slamming against her ribs. She stumbled to the side and dropped to her knees, shaking. This wasn't treasure. This wasn't history. This was a grave. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had finally called it in. Rachel hugged herself, staring at the hole she'd opened, the truth clawing its way into daylight. She hadn't been looking for money. She hadn't been looking for fame. She'd been listening, and whatever the town tried to forget, it had finally found someone who refused to look away. The sirens got louder fast. At first they were just a distant wail, threading through the quiet town like a warning. Then they multiplied. 2, maybe 3 vehicles, until the sound swallowed everything else. The neighbor whispers, the wind in the trees, even Rachel's own breathing. Red and blue lights flashed between houses as the first police cruiser rolled up to the curb in front of her home. It stopped hard, tires crunching gravel. Another car pulled in behind it. Then a third. Doors opened, radios crackled, boots hit the ground. Rachel stood near the edge of the hole, hands still coated in dirt, chest rising and falling too fast. Her brain felt like it was skipping. This couldn't be real. A uniformed officer approached first, one hand resting near his belt. He looked young, but his eyes hardened immediately when he saw the crowd, the shovels, the gaping pit in the yard. "Ma'am," he called out, voice firm, "step away from the excavation." Rachel lifted her hand slightly, as if that would prove she wasn't a threat. I lived here, she stammered. I was metal detecting, and I found. Her voice cracked. There's a car. The officer's face tightened. He looked toward the hole, then back to her. A car? He repeated, like his brain didn't want to accept it either. Rachel nodded quickly. Buried. It's real. The officer motioned with his hand. Everybody back, now. Most of the neighbors stepped back immediately, but some lingered, leaning for a better view. Phones were still out. Whispering continued like a low buzz. I told you that yard was off, someone muttered. I heard stories, another whispered back. Old stories. Rachel's legs felt weak. She took a step away from the hole, but her eyes stayed locked on it. The trunk was still open. The image of what she'd seen inside was burned into her mind. Rotted fabric, a wallet, the shape of a shoe, the smell of something that didn't belong under sunlight. Another officer approached her, older, a little heavier, the kind of person who'd seen enough to keep his face unreadable. Did you touch anything? He asked. Rachel swallowed. I opened the trunk. His eyebrows lifted. You opened it. I didn't know, she said quickly. I thought it was, I don't know what I thought. I called, someone called. All right, he said, cutting her off gently. Just stay right here. Don't move. Rachel nodded, numb. Then she heard the next set of vehicles roll up. Not police. Bigger. Unmarked. A black SUV. Another behind it. Plain. Quiet. Expensive looking. They parked with the calm confidence of people who didn't need sirens to command attention. The crowd parted as a man stepped out. Detective Aaron Cole. He was tall, late 40s maybe, lean build, sharp eyes. His hair was peppered with gray, but his posture was straight, like the weight of responsibility kept him upright. He wore a simple button-down with a badge clipped at his belt, and the kind of expression that didn't waste time. He walked straight up to the officers, exchanging quick words Rachel couldn't hear. They pointed toward the hole. Detective Cole's gaze lifted and locked onto Rachel. He approached her without rushing, but every step looked purposeful, like his mind was already assembling facts. Rachel Morgan, he asked. Rachel blinked. Yes, he nodded once. I'm Detective Cole. You made the call? She shook her head. I didn't. I was about to. Someone else did. But I found it. His eyes narrowed slightly. You found a buried vehicle? Rachel swallowed hard. Yes. He glanced toward the hole. And you opened the trunk. Rachel's cheeks burned with shame. I didn't know what it was. I'm sorry. Detective Cole didn't scold her. He just looked at her like he understood curiosity could be dangerous. All right, he said calmly. Tell me exactly what you saw. Rachel hugged her arms tighter. A suitcase, clothes, a wallet, something else. It smelled. She gagged slightly and turned her face away. It smelled like death. Detective Cole's jaw tightened. He stared at the hole for a long moment before speaking again. Do you know how long this house has been here? He asked. Rachel frowned. The record said early 1960s. Detective Cole nodded slowly. And you said the backyard looked disturbed. Yes, Rachel whispered, like someone dug it up a long time ago and tried to hide it. Detective Cole's gaze sharpened. That's what it looks like. He turned away from her and walked toward the edge of the hole. The neighbors leaned in again, hungry for what happened next. Back up, an officer barked. Crime scene, move. Some listened, some didn't. Detective Cole crouched near the edge, careful not to step into the disturbed area. He scanned the car roof, the shattered rear window, the trunk lid gaping open. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Recognition. Rachel saw it. She felt it. He knew this. Detective Cole turned to one of the officers. "Tape off the entire yard. I want a perimeter, at least 20 feet out." "Yes, Detective." Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze moments later, cutting Rachel's backyard into a boxed-off secret. Detective Cole climbed down carefully into the pit, stepping into the same dirt Rachel had been standing in only minutes ago. He looked into the trunk, and for the first time, his expression cracked. Not wide, not dramatic, but his eyes widened slightly, the way they do when your brain catches up to something your body already knows. He reached in with gloved hands, pulled out the wallet. It stuck slightly to whatever moisture time had left behind. He opened it with careful fingers. Rachel watched from above, stomach twisting. Detective Cole stared at the ID. His face went pale. It was subtle, but Rachel saw it. He looked up, straight at her. "This man," he said, voice low, controlled, "vanished 20 years ago." Rachel's breath caught hard. "What?" Detective Cole didn't answer right away. He looked back into the trunk, lifting the rotted suitcase just enough to peer beneath. Then his gaze landed on a sealed plastic bag wedged into a corner. A diary. The plastic was grimy, but the contents inside looked intact. Detective Cole picked it up like it was fragile, like it might shatter if he held it too tightly. His hands tightened around it. Rachel could see the tension moving through his shoulders. He climbed out of the hole slowly, holding the diary and the wallet. When he reached the top, he didn't hand them to an officer immediately. He looked at them like they weighed more than paper and leather. Rachel stepped forward instinctively. Who was he? Detective Cole's eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back to her. His voice dropped. "Name was Daniel Hargrove," he said. "He worked for a local business back then. Big one. Powerful." Rachel's skin prickled. "And he disappeared?" Detective Cole nodded, jaw clenched. "Just gone. Case got cold. People stopped talking." Rachel's throat tightened. How could someone bury a car in a yard without anyone noticing? Detective Cole's gaze cut toward the neighbors now standing behind tape, whispering, staring, filming. "That's the question," he said. And in his tone was something that wasn't just curiosity. It was suspicion. Rachel's stomach churned. She glanced around at the faces behind the tape. The same friendly smiles she'd seen at the grocery store. The same folks who joked about her hobby. Now their expressions weren't friendly. Some were shocked. Some were. And some looked nervous. Rachel's eyes found Mr. Thomas Reed standing near the back of the crowd, half behind another neighbor. His face was tight, his hands clasped together like he was praying. He saw Rachel looking, and quickly looked away. Rachel felt cold spread through her chest. Mr. Reed hadn't warned her because of superstition. He warned her because he knew. Detective Cole turned to the officers. "Get forensics here, now. I want the vehicle ID'd, plates if possible. I want the trunk photographed, contents cataloged, everything." "Yes, sir." Then he looked back at Rachel, voice gentler. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to come down to the station later and give a formal statement." Rachel nodded, still staring at the diary in his hands. Is he in there?" she whispered. Detective Cole didn't answer directly. He just looked at her, eyes hard with reality. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "This was a burial." Rachel's vision blurred. She thought of yesterday, laughing at neighbor jokes, sweeping her metal detector over the yard like she was chasing old pennies. She hadn't been treasure hunting. She'd been standing on top of someone's last secret. A secret the town had helped bury. And now, under flashing lights and yellow tape, it was finally breathing again. Detective Cole tucked the diary into an evidence bag and held it tight. Rachel watched him do it, her hands shaking, because she realized something terrifying in that moment. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The backyard didn't feel like Rachel's anymore. By the time the forensics van arrived, the place where she'd once paced with a metal detector had been swallowed by uniforms, evidence markers, and yellow tape snapping in the breeze. The oak tree at the edge of the yard stood like a silent witness, its leaves rustling as if whispering to itself. Rachel sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had handed her. She hadn't noticed the chill until it settled into her bones. Her coffee mug still sat on the railing where she'd left it that morning, cold and untouched. Detective Aaron Cole stood a few yards away, speaking quietly into his phone. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge under it now. Something sharper than routine procedure. "Yes," he said. "I'm sure. No, this wasn't accidental, because it's him." Rachel caught that last part. Because it's him. He ended the call and turned back toward the yard, rubbing a hand over his jaw. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the hole, at the half-exposed sedan, like it might answer questions if he looked long enough. Rachel pushed herself to her feet. "Detective?" she said quietly. He looked up, surprised she'd moved. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though it wasn't exactly true. "You said his name like you knew it." Detective Cole studied her for a second, then nodded once. "I did." Rachel's stomach tightened. "How?" He motioned for her to walk with him a few steps away from the noise, toward the side of the house, where the shadows were longer and the air felt heavier. "Daniel Hargrove," he said carefully. He wasn't just some guy who vanished. Rachel hugged the blanket tighter. "Who was he?" Cole exhaled slowly. He worked for Hargrove and Sons Manufacturing, big employer around here back in the day. One of the town's golden names. Rachel frowned. "You said his last name was Hargrove, too." "Yeah," Cole replied. "Family business." But Daniel wasn't running machines or pushing papers. He was an accountant. Rachel waited. "He started noticing things," Cole continued. "Numbers that didn't add up, missing funds, bribes disguised as donations, environmental violations buried under fake reports." Rachel's eyes widened. "He was a whistleblower," Cole nodded. "Exactly." Rachel's heart dropped. "And he disappeared." "Right when he was supposed to testify," Cole said. "The official story was that he ran off, took money, abandoned his family." Rachel shook her head slowly. "But that wasn't true." "No," Cole said quietly. "It wasn't." He glanced back toward the yard, where forensics were photographing the trunk, cataloging its contents. "I was a rookie back then," he added. "Assigned to assist on the case. We asked questions, knocked on doors. And then we were told to stop." "Told by who?" Rachel asked. Cole's jaw tightened. "People with more influence than a young detective should push against." Rachel swallowed. So the case was buried. Cole met her eyes. "Just like the car." Rachel's breath hitched. "What about the diary?" she asked. "You said it changed everything." Cole nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a sealed evidence bag. Inside, the diary sat wrapped in clouded plastic, its pages warped but intact. "He was careful," Cole said. "He documented everything. Dates, names, places, transactions." Rachel stared at it. "Why keep it in the car?" Cole's gaze drifted to the hole again. "Because he knew. I think he realized they were on to him. He hid the evidence the only place he thought they wouldn't look, somewhere already tainted. Rachel's skin prickled. His last entry, I saw part of it. Cole's eyes softened slightly. Yeah, so did I. Rachel hesitated. What did it say? Cole opened the bag just enough to peer through the plastic, then closed it again. It said, "If they find this car, tell my daughter I tried." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. He had a daughter, she whispered. Cole nodded. She was 8 when he vanished. Rachel felt something twist painfully in her chest. She grew up thinking he left her. Exactly, Cole said. That was the point. They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on them. Rachel broke it. "Mr. Reed," she said suddenly. "The neighbor. He warned me." Cole's eyes sharpened. "What did he say?" "That some things were better left buried," Rachel replied. "And he looked scared. Not joking scared. Real scared." Cole followed her gaze to where Thomas Reed now stood across the street, pretending to talk to another neighbor while stealing glances toward the yard. Cole nodded slowly. "That tracks." "You think he knew?" Rachel asked. "I think a lot of people knew," Cole said. "Or knew enough to stay quiet." Rachel's pulse thudded. "So what happens now?" Cole straightened, his shoulders squaring. "Now," he said, "the past doesn't get to stay buried." Rachel watched as officers carried the diary toward the evidence van like it was fragile glass. "But this town," she started. "This town is going to have a real uncomfortable conversation with itself," Cole finished. "And some people are going to panic." As if on cue, a black sedan rolled slowly past the house, windows tinted dark. It didn't stop, just slowed, then kept going. Cole noticed, and so did Rachel. Her voice dropped. "Someone's already watching." Cole nodded. "That's why this time we do it right." He turned to her, expression firm but grateful. "You didn't have to dig," he said. "Most people would have stopped after the first weird sign." Rachel swallowed. "I couldn't." Cole gave a small nod. "Because of that. A man who was erased gets his voice back." Rachel looked at the torn earth, at the place where the truth had slept for 20 years. "And his daughter?" she asked quietly. Cole's voice softened. "I'm calling her tonight." Rachel closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed again. Not rushing now, but steady, official. The kind of sound that meant things were moving. Rachel realized then that buying this house hadn't been an accident. Neither had her hobby. The ground hadn't screamed because it wanted attention. It screamed because it wanted justice. And now, finally, someone was listening. The quiet town didn't stay quiet for long. By sunset, Rachel's street looked nothing like the place she'd moved into only weeks ago. News vans lined the curb. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers blooming overnight. Camera crews stood behind police tape, speaking urgently into microphones. The air buzzed with speculation, accusation, disbelief. Rachel watched it all from her porch, wrapped in the same blanket, her phone buzzing non-stop in her pocket. She hadn't answered a single call. Detective Cole stood near the edge of the yard, coordinating with officers and forensics, his voice calm but sharp. Every movement now felt deliberate, like a chessboard had been set, and someone had finally made the first move. A reporter's voice floated through the air. Human remains, discovered in a vehicle buried beneath a private residence. Rachel flinched. Detective Cole noticed and walked over. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her stomach churned. This escalated fast. "It was always going to," Cole said. "They kept this buried for 20 years. Truth doesn't like staying quiet once it's exposed. Rachel glanced toward the crowd. They're saying his name. Cole nodded. They are. Across the street, Mr. Thomas Reed stood stiffly on his porch, arms crossed tight against his chest. He hadn't gone inside since the police arrived. His eyes darted between the cameras, the officers, and Rachel's yard like he was waiting for something, or someone. Rachel caught his gaze. This time he didn't look away. He looked resigned. Detective Cole followed her line of sight. He's nervous. You think he helped? Rachel asked. Cole exhaled. Maybe not directly, but silence helps just as much. As night settled in, officers erected floodlights around the excavation. The bright, white beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the sedan like a confession dragged into the open. Forensics worked carefully, methodically. Every item was photographed, bagged, labeled. The wallet, the clothing, the diary. When the remains were finally lifted with quiet reverence, the crowd went silent. Rachel turned away, tears burning behind her eyes. Somewhere in that crowd, someone began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the sound of grief, finally realizing it had been justified all along. Later that night, Detective Cole stepped away from the chaos and made a call. Rachel watched him from the porch as he leaned against his unmarked SUV, phone pressed to his ear, face drawn tight. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. My name is Aaron Cole. I'm calling about your father. Rachel's breath caught. She couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she could imagine it. Confused, guarded, wounded. I know, Cole continued gently. I know what you were told, but we found him. He paused, then his shoulders sagged. I'm so sorry. Rachel turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth as the weight of that moment settled in her chest. When Cole returned, his eyes were darker. She's on her way, he said quietly. She lives a few hours out. Took the first flight she could. Rachel nodded. What did you tell her? The truth, he replied, for the first time. By morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines screamed from screens. Missing whistleblower found buried. Town cover-up suspected. Names began to surface. Old officials, former executives, people who hadn't held power in years, but once had enough to bury a man and his truth. Phones rang nonstop at City Hall. Lawyers issued statements. Some denied everything. Others said nothing at all. Rachel sat at her kitchen table, watching it unfold on the morning news. Her coffee untouched again. She hadn't slept. At noon, Detective Cole knocked on her door. They're panicking, he said. Who? Rachel asked. Everyone who thought this would stay forgotten, Cole replied. The diary is a problem. Rachel swallowed. Because it proves intent? And conspiracy, Cole added. Dates line up. Transactions. Witness intimidation. Payoffs. Rachel rubbed her arms. So they knew he'd expose them. And they stopped him, Cole said. Rachel's gaze drifted to the backyard. This started as a hobby, she whispered. I just wanted to learn the history of the place. Cole met her eyes. You uncovered the truth they tried to erase. By late afternoon, unmarked cars began appearing around town. Men in suits, federal badges. The case had outgrown the local department. Search warrants were issued. Former leaders were escorted out of offices they hadn't stepped into in years. One man collapsed during questioning. Another tried to flee the state. None succeeded. The diary detonated everything. Rachel stood at the edge of her yard as officers removed the final pieces of the car, the earth left behind like an open wound. It felt wrong to leave it empty. As dusk approached, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A taxi pulled up. A woman stepped out. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back tight, face pale, but set with determination. Her eyes scanned the scene, locking onto the yard, the lights, the tape. Detective Cole approached her immediately. Rachel watched as the woman clutched her arms around herself, shaking. "That's her," Cole said quietly to Rachel. "His daughter." Rachel's chest tightened. The woman walked slowly toward the tape, her steps hesitant, like she was afraid the ground might give way beneath her. She stopped at the edge of the yard and stared. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, voice barely audible, "They told me he ran away." Rachel felt tears spill down her cheeks. "They told me he didn't want me," the woman continued, "that he chose money over family." Detective Cole shook his head gently. "He chose you. That's why he died." The woman's knees buckled. Rachel moved without thinking, stepping forward to support her as she sobbed. Grief finally given permission to exist. "I hated him," the woman cried. "For years, I hated him." Rachel held her, whispering, "I'm so sorry." Later, after the crowd thinned and the news vans pulled away, Rachel returned to the yard. The hole was empty now. No car, no remains, just disturbed earth under the stars. She knelt and pressed her palm into the soil one last time. "I found you," she whispered. Behind her, Detective Cole spoke softly. "You did more than that," he said. "You gave him his voice back." Rachel stood slowly. The storm hadn't destroyed her quiet life. It had revealed the truth buried beneath it. And the town would never be the same again. The town woke up different the next morning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than usual, like everyone had agreed, without saying it out loud, to tread carefully around a truth that could no longer be ignored. Rachel stood at her kitchen window, watching mist lift slowly from the backyard. The hole had been filled in overnight by investigators, packed down just enough to be safe, but not enough to erase what had been there. The ground still bore the memory. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the trunk opening again, smelled the air rush out, felt the weight of realizing she'd been standing on a grave for weeks without knowing it. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Detective Cole. She answered immediately. "They're bringing her back this morning," he said without preamble. Rachel swallowed. "The daughter?" "Yes. Formal identification, statements, and closure, as much as anyone can get." Rachel nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I'll be here." "Thank you," Cole said. "You don't have to be." "I know," Rachel replied quietly, "but I want to." By mid-morning, the street was blocked off again, but this time without the frenzy of cameras, just official vehicles, quiet purpose. The storm had passed. Now came the reckoning. Rachel stepped outside as a black sedan pulled up. The woman stepped out slowly. Her name was Elena Hargrove. She looked older than her years, not in appearance, but in posture. Like someone who'd learned early that hope was dangerous if you held it too tightly. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, sharpened by something that had hardened overnight. Detective Cole walked beside her. Elena stopped at the edge of the yard. This time, there were no cameras, no neighbors hovering close, just silence and a small cluster of people who understood what this moment meant. Rachel stood a few feet back, unsure if she belonged here. Elena noticed her. "You're the one who found him," she said. Rachel nodded slowly. "I'm Rachel." Elena studied her for a moment, then surprised her by holding out her hand. "Thank you," she said. Rachel's throat tightened as she shook it. "I'm sorry it took so long." Elena looked past her, at the earth. So am I. But I guess some truths need the right person. Detective Cole cleared his throat. We're ready when you are. Elena nodded once. They walked to where the car had been uncovered. Now it was just a rectangle of disturbed soil, marked with small flags. Elena knelt. She pressed her fingers into the dirt, exactly where Rachel had done days earlier. My dad used to say, "Dirt remembers," she whispered. That you can bury things, but the ground always knows. Rachel felt chills ripple down her arms. Elena closed her eyes. I spent years thinking he left because I wasn't enough, she said quietly. Every birthday, every graduation, every time I failed or succeeded, I thought it didn't matter to him. Her voice cracked. They told me he was selfish, that he chose money over me. Detective Cole's jaw tightened. Elena opened her eyes again, this time filled with fire instead of grief. But he didn't, she said. He chose truth, and that's why they killed him. That word, killed, landed heavy. Rachel realized then that this wasn't just about mourning anymore. This was about accountability. By noon, arrests began. It started quietly. A former city council member was taken into custody at his lakeside home. Then, a retired police captain. Then, an executive from the old manufacturing company. Now, gray-haired, shaking, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The town watched from behind curtains and phone screens as names they'd trusted were escorted into vehicles they never expected to see them in. Rachel stood in her living room, watching the news update in real time. Multiple arrests made in connection with decades-old disappearance. Diary confirms long-suspected cover-up. Charges include obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. She turned the TV off. The noise felt wrong. Later that afternoon, Detective Cole returned. This time, with a look on his face Rachel hadn't seen before. Relief. They're talking, he said. Rachel's heart thudded. Who? Everyone, Cole replied. When one domino fell, the rest didn't want to be the last standing. He sat at her kitchen table, rubbing his temples. They thought time protected them. Thought memories faded. Thought records disappeared. He looked up at her. They underestimated truth. Rachel poured him a glass of water. And the diary? She asked. Cole let out a short, humorless laugh. That thing is a grenade. Dates, meetings, payments, threats. Names of people who didn't pull the trigger but made sure someone else did. Rachel felt sick. All these years. Yeah, Cole said softly. And do you know the worst part? Rachel shook her head. They made him look like the villain, Cole said. They destroyed his name so no one would miss him enough to ask questions. Rachel stared at the table. And the town believed it. Cole nodded. Most of them didn't want to believe anything else. That evening, the town held an impromptu gathering. Not official, not planned. Just people drawn together by shared guilt, grief, and disbelief. Candles lined the sidewalk near Rachel's fence. Someone placed flowers by the oak tree. Someone else left a note, folded carefully in plastic. Rachel stood at the edge, watching strangers mourn a man they'd ignored for 20 years. Elena stood beside her. They didn't come when he disappeared, Elena said quietly. But they're here now. Rachel nodded. Sometimes it takes seeing the truth to feel it. Elena looked at her. You could have sold this story, gone on every show, cashed in. Rachel shook her head. It's not mine to sell. Elena smiled faintly. My dad would have liked you. Rachel felt tears sting again. The breaking point came the next morning. Detective Cole called Rachel early. They found more, he said. Her stomach dropped. More what? Evidence, he replied. Another burial site, not on your property. Rachel closed her eyes. "How many?" she asked. Cole hesitated. "We don't know yet." The truth was bigger than one car, bigger than one man. The town hadn't just buried a whistleblower. It had buried a pattern. By the end of the week, the mayor resigned. 2 officials were suspended. The manufacturing company's remaining assets were seized pending investigation. Rachel watched it all unfold with a strange mix of disbelief and clarity. Her quiet life hadn't shattered. It had sharpened. One afternoon, she returned to the backyard alone. The hole was gone now, leveled, smoothed. She knelt and planted a young oak sapling where the car had been. Elena stood beside her. "For him?" Elena asked. Rachel nodded. "For truth." Elena pressed soil around the roots with steady hands. "For my dad," she said. They stood together in silence. The wind moved through the yard, gentle and respectful. Rachel realized then that metal detecting hadn't led her to this moment by accident. History doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it finally breaks the surface, it changes everyone who touches it. The arrests didn't feel like victory. Not at first. They felt like the beginning of a long exhale the town didn't know it had been holding for 20 years. An exhale that came out shaky, uneven, full of guilt and relief, all tangled together. Rachel learned quickly that justice wasn't a clean ending. It was paperwork, court dates, phone calls at odd hours, witnesses who suddenly remembered things they'd spent decades pretending to forget. And through it all, the town kept moving, slow, cautious, like it was afraid the ground might open up again if people walked too confidently. Rachel sat at her kitchen table with Detective Cole one morning while he laid out the next steps in plain language. His voice was steady, but his eyes looked tired. Not from lack of sleep, he'd lived tired for years. This tired was something deeper. The tired of a man watching his own community confront what it had allowed. "We're reopening the entire case officially," he said, tapping a folder with his knuckle. "Not just the disappearance, the cover-up." Rachel nodded. "And the diary?" Cole exhaled. "That diary is the spine of it. It's not just emotional, it's detailed. It ties people together." Rachel stared at the folder like it might bite her. "So they can't twist it," she said. Cole's mouth tightened. "They'll try." He stood and walked to the window, watching a patrol car idling down the street. The town was still jumpy. Any siren made curtains flutter. Any unmarked car made people stop talking mid-sentence. "People who've gotten away with something for that long," Cole said quietly, "don't suddenly become honest. They become desperate." Rachel's stomach tightened. "You think I'm in danger?" Cole turned back to her, expression careful. "I think you're visible," he said. "And some folks hate that. They'd rather you be another quiet neighbor who keeps her head down." Rachel's chest rose with a slow breath. "I didn't ask to be visible." "I know," Cole replied gently. "But sometimes the truth doesn't ask either." That afternoon, Elena Hargrove met Rachel at the yard. The sapling they'd planted stood upright now, thin and fragile, its tiny leaves trembling in the wind. It looked too small to hold the weight of what it represented. But that was how truth always started, Rachel realized. Small, vulnerable, alive anyway. Elena crouched beside it, pressing her fingertips against the soil like she was making sure her father was really gone, really found. "They scheduled the formal release," Elena said softly. Rachel's throat tightened. "His remains?" Elena nodded. Rachel didn't know what to say. No phrase felt big enough. Elena stood slowly, and looked at Rachel with an expression that was raw and honest. I used to imagine him walking back through the front door, she admitted. Like he'd been stuck somewhere and finally escaped. I used to practice being mad at him so I could pretend I didn't miss him. Rachel swallowed hard. And now? She asked. Elena's mouth trembled. Now I just want him to be treated like he mattered, not like some rumor people laughed about. Rachel nodded. He will be. Elena studied her. You've been so calm through all of this. How? Rachel let a quiet laugh that wasn't funny. I'm not calm. I'm just focused. If I let myself feel everything at once, I'll fall apart. Elena's eyes softened. If you do, it's okay. Rachel blinked, surprised by the kindness. It hit her then. This wasn't just Elena's healing. It was hers too, because Rachel had been the first one to pull the truth into the sunlight, and now she had to live with it. 2 weeks later, the town gathered for a memorial. It wasn't the kind of memorial with polished speeches and perfect weather. It was simple, honest. A folding table in the community center with framed photos of Daniel Hargrove at different ages. A few candles. A stack of printed pages with his name in bold. Rachel stood at the back of the room, uncomfortable with attention, but unable to stay away. Elena stood near the front, hands clasped, shoulders squared like she'd made a decision. She would not shrink anymore. Detective Cole stood off to the side in a plain suit, looking like he didn't know how to exist in a room where he wasn't chasing something. When Elena stepped up to speak, the room went silent. She took one breath. Then another. My father didn't abandon me, she said, voice clear despite the tremble in it. He was taken. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena continued, eyes scanning faces. Neighbors, former classmates, older couples who'd watched her grow up. People who'd smiled at her while holding on to a lie they didn't want to challenge. For 20 years, I carried shame that didn't belong to me, she said. An anger that should have been aimed at the people who made him disappear. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. They called him a runaway. They called him selfish. They called him a man who didn't love his family enough to stay. She paused, swallowing. But he wrote this diary. He documented everything because he knew they'd try to erase him. Elena held up a photocopied page, just one. Black ink, faded but readable. And in his last entry, he wrote something I can't stop thinking about. The room leaned in. Elena's voice softened. If they find this car, tell my daughter I tried. A sob came from somewhere in the front row. Elena's eyes shone, but she didn't wipe the tears. He tried, she said firmly. He tried to protect people. He tried to expose corruption. He tried to do the right thing. She lifted her chin. And now I'm going to finish what he started by telling the truth every chance I get, by making sure his name isn't buried again. When Elena stepped back, the room erupted into applause, quiet at first, then stronger, steadier. Not celebration, recognition. Rachel's throat tightened so hard she couldn't breathe properly. Detective Cole met her eyes across the room, and for the first time since all of this began, his expression looked lighter. After the memorial, a few people approached Rachel. She didn't know most of them well. Some were neighbors. Some were strangers who'd driven in from nearby towns. Their faces carried that same awkward mix of gratitude and discomfort. Like they wanted to thank her, but also didn't want to admit they'd been wrong for so long. One older woman clasped Rachel's hands. I lived here my whole life, she whispered. I heard rumors, but I never asked questions. I should have. Rachel didn't judge her. She just nodded. Thank you for saying that, Rachel replied quietly. It matters. A man in a baseball cap approached next, eyes down. My uncle was on the council back then, he admitted. He always said it was complicated. Rachel's jaw tightened. It was murder. The man flinched, then nodded. Yeah, he whispered. It was. Rachel stepped outside afterward, needing air. The evening was cool, the sky washed with pink and purple. She stood by the entrance for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to remember what her life had been like before she bought this house, before she dug. Detective Cole joined her, hands in his pockets. They're filing charges federally now, he said. Not just local. Rachel nodded slowly. So it's real? It's real, Cole confirmed. And because of the diary, it's solid. Rachel stared out at the parking lot, where Elena stood, talking to someone quietly, her posture stronger than it had been on day one. What happens to the people arrested? Rachel asked. Cole's face hardened. Trials, sentencing, and a whole lot of uncomfortable truths. Rachel nodded. Good. Cole glanced at her. You don't sound satisfied. Rachel blinked. I'm not. Not because I want revenge. Because 20 years is 20 years. Cole's voice dropped. I know. Rachel turned to him. Why didn't you keep pushing back then? Cole held her gaze, and for the first time, the tough detective mask slipped completely. Because I was young, he admitted. Because I was told if I pushed, I'd lose my job. And if I lost my job, I couldn't protect anyone. Rachel's heart tightened. And I told myself, Cole continued, that keeping quiet was the lesser evil. But it wasn't. It was just easier. Rachel nodded slowly. Thank you for admitting that. Cole exhaled. You're the only reason I get a chance to do the right thing now. Later that night, Rachel stood in her backyard again. The yard looked normal at first glance. Grass, fence, shadows. But she could never unsee what it had held. She walked to the sapling and crouched beside it. The leaves fluttered in the breeze. She placed a hand on the thin trunk. You're going to grow, she whispered, and everyone's going to remember why you're here. Behind her, Elena approached quietly. I'm leaving tomorrow, Elena said softly. Rachel turned, surprised. Leah, Elena nodded. Yeah, but not running this time. I'm going to build something. A foundation. Maybe a scholarship in his name. Something that makes sure whistleblowers don't get erased so easily. Rachel's eyes warmed. He'd be proud. Elena's lips trembled. I hope so. They stood together in the dark, two women connected by a truth neither had asked for, but both had chosen to honor. Rachel realized then that resolution wasn't about the hole being filled. It was about what replaced it. Not dirt, not silence, but growth, memory, justice that could finally breathe. The sun was sinking slowly behind the trees, turning the sky into a soft wash of orange and fading gold. Rachel Morgan sat in a weathered wooden chair at the edge of her backyard, the legs pressed into soil that no longer felt ordinary beneath her feet. The yard was quiet now, not empty, just calm, the kind of calm that only comes after something heavy has finally been lifted. In front of her, the ground lay smooth again. Where there had once been torn earth, police tape, flashing lights, and whispered disbelief, there was now a young tree. Its leaves fluttered gently in the evening breeze, catching the light like tiny mirrors. It wasn't tall or impressive. It didn't dominate the yard. It didn't need to. Rachel watched it sway, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The metal detector rested beside her chair, leaned carefully against the fence, like an old companion finally allowed to rest. She hadn't turned it on in days. I thought I was searching for metal, she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the wind. Coins, relics, things people forgot. She paused, swallowing. but I uncovered truth. The words felt heavier when spoken aloud, truer, like the ground itself was listening. The tree rustled again, leaves whispering against one another. Rachel imagined roots spreading beneath the surface, pushing through layers of dirt that had once hidden something terrible. She liked thinking about that, new life reaching through old darkness. Her eyes drifted to the spot where it had all begun, the place where her detector had screamed louder and louder, refusing to be ignored. She remembered laughing it off at first, brushing sweat from her forehead, telling herself it was probably junk, old pipes, scraps, nothing important. But something inside her had known better. The town hadn't wanted this story unearthed. She thought of the faces that had appeared when the car was revealed. Shock, fear, recognition. Of how quickly some people had gone quiet. Of how others suddenly remembered details they'd sworn they'd forgotten. Secrets didn't disappear just because people agreed not to talk about them. They waited. Some secrets survive longer than lies, Rachel murmured. They just wait for the right person to listen. The breeze carried the faint scent of fresh soil and grass. Somewhere nearby, a screen door closed. A car drove past. Normal sounds. Ordinary life continuing, even after the truth had torn through the ground like a wound. She leaned forward and picked up the metal detector, running her fingers along its scratched handle. It had started as a hobby, something to do with quiet afternoons and idle curiosity, something harmless. Now it felt different, heavier. She set it gently on the ground beside her chair, laying it down instead of leaning it away. Not everything buried is lost, she said softly. Some things are waiting to be found. Her mind wandered to the daughter, the woman who had stood frozen when she first saw the car. The way her hands had shaken as she held the diary. The way anger had mixed with grief in her eyes, as years of lies collapsed all at once. They told her he ran, that he didn't care, that he chose to disappear. Rachel's jaw tightened. The truth had given that woman something back. Not time, not peace, not yet, but honesty. A name cleared, a voice returned. That mattered. Rachel leaned back in her chair, letting the last warmth of the sun touch her face. She felt changed, though she couldn't explain exactly how. Not braver, not stronger in some dramatic way, just more aware. Aware that history doesn't stay buried because it wants to. Aware that silence is often chosen, not accidental. Aware that ordinary people sometimes stand on top of extraordinary truths without knowing it. The sky darkened by degrees, the gold fading into blue. The tree stood still now, as if settling into its place. Rachel stood slowly, joints stiff from sitting too long. She brushed dirt from her hands and took one final look at the yard. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt honest. She picked up the metal detector, paused, then carried it inside, but didn't put it away. Instead, she rested it by the door, where it could be reached easily. Not because she was eager to dig again, but because she understood now. Listening mattered. She turned back to the yard one last time, the young tree outlined against the darkening sky, and felt something steady settle in her chest. The truth had waited long enough.